No Wi-Fi. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Planning Committee. It is Thursday, the 24th of October. I'll just start with the Chair's introduction as usual. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and currently being streamed live, and these recordings are also published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. We don't have anything planned. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings, please. All escape routes are clearly signed. Once we leave the building, we're assembling on the High Street opposite the Guildhall. And this is really important. Please, can everybody, speakers and members, use their microphones? If necessary, lift it up. When you're speaking, it's really important that we can all hear you. It's picked up by the broadcast. Thank you. Right. Juliet, do we have any substitutes or apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do. We've got two substitutes. So Jill DeSarah is here for Ed Kimberley this afternoon. Alina Round is here for Andrew Cross. And where Councillor John Rudge isn't here at the moment, I understand he had work commitment this morning, but I understood he was going to be here for the start of the meeting.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Julian. Steph, we've got a City Council application today. I whether you could just give us an idea of declarations of interest from councils who've been involved in that.
Thank you, Chair. So we've actually got a few items today that there may be declarations on, so I'll just run through them in order if that's okay. I'm not expecting any for Rose Hill Cottage, but if anyone would like to declare an interest, time. Okay, so Coma Gardens Community Centre is a Worcester City Council application, so members may have been involved in other committees where this has been discussed. I think it's also part of our Towns Fund projects. Constitutionally, I'm not concerned about that. I think those discussions will have been a sort of wider principle of the scheme rather than the planning detail itself. So I'm happy that everybody is okay to participate on that basis.
Sorry, just like to declare that I'm a member of the management committee for Coma Hall Garden. I've attended one meeting so far. I wasn't involved in the application. Pecuniary interest, and I'm comfortable that I can be.
Okay, great. I think that one's fine. And 125 Victoria Avenue, as you'll be aware, members have had some advice on this earlier this week. It is an application by Councillor Riaz, who, as a long-standing councillor, many of you will have worked with over the years. That professional relationship doesn't cause an issue in terms of participating in voting, but if anyone did feel they had a closer, more personal relationship with him that may appear to show a sort of preponderance towards predetermination, that now, otherwise I think. Great, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. We're just going to go through the minutes of the last planning committee. I have got an amendment on page 2, but if we just start with page 1, it was on the 19th of September. Has anyone got any comments on page 1? No? Okay, so on page 2, these minutes are not verbatim, they are in the spirit of the discussion. And under key points of debate, it says that committee members agree that the reduction in car parking spaces was a positive. Well, I don't think we did say that. I think what we said was that the new layout of the car parking spaces was a positive because it gave the opportunity for larger vehicles to be parked. We weren't saying that we're in favour of losing spaces. I don't know whether people are happy if I change that sentence to be, committee members agreed that the new layout of car parking spaces was a positive, as this would provide an opportunity for larger vehicles to park with more space to open doors for those with mobility issues and those with children, rather than that the reduction in car parking spaces was. Yep, great, thank you. And then we've got page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Everyone happy? Thank you. Okay, so today we had a site visit. I'd like to thank every councillor for coming along and for officers for taking us. I think we all found it really useful. It was to the Rose Hill Cottage, which is our first application. Julian, do we have public participation or representation, please?
Yeah, we do have speakers for the item that you just mentioned, Rose Hill. We don't have anybody to speak public participation.
Lovely, thank you. Okay. So in that case, shall we have, we've got 2 seats, haven't we? Should we have the 2 speakers, if you'd like to come up and sit in the chairs? Got 2 speakers. We've got the 2 there. And then we'll have the officer do the presentation first. And then we'll have the, is it Mrs. Potter? Miss Potter first, and then Jackie James second. And in between, once you speak, you'll have 5 minutes each, and then you have the opportunity for councillors to ask you questions as well, based on material considerations. Thank you. Right, so this is Laura presenting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for full planning permission for the demolition of the existing dwelling known as Rose Hill Cottage and the replacement with a new dwelling. The proposals during the course of the application have been amended to address officer concerns regarding design and massing. There is a late paper in respect of this item that I would just like to draw members' attention to. The late paper just sets out additional neighbour comments that was received following the publication of the agenda. Also, just to make members aware that additional representation has been received in respect of the size of the dwelling in comparison with surrounding properties. The application referred to Planning Committee at the request of Councillor Riaz and Councillor Sadiq. As a result of concerns that the proposals would have a significant impact on the conservation area, heritage and the street scene, and there has been local objection to the Okay, can everybody hear me better now? Is that better? Can everybody hear me better now? Yes. Okay, so the application site is outlined in red on the location plan on the slide, and it's also outlined in the above satellite photograph. The application site is accessed off Rose Hill. The street scene in this location has a wide range of properties of different ages and types, including a row of terraced dwellings to the north and detached bungalow properties opposite the front of the dwelling on the other side of the road. Whilst the application site is located within the Sidbury and Fort Royal Conservation Area, the site itself is unlisted. The site is, however, located within close proximity to listed buildings, including Grade 2 listed 79 to 87 London Road, which are group listed. They're just shown on the in red on the southern boundary of the site. There is also a locally listed structure shown by the dark blue square on the footpath opposite the site in the form of a gatepost of the now demolished Rose Hill House, which was historically to the north of the site. There are also 2 additional gateposts from the former Rose Hill House to the rear of the site on Rose Avenue that are shown by the red squares. These are both unaffected by the proposed development. Now looking at some site photographs, the first photo here just showing the frontage of Rose Hill Cottage as the photo shows. The existing property is an L-shaped red brick detached property. The cottage has been extended over time to both sides with a garage extending to the left and single-storey extensions to both of the sides, just as visible here. Now moving around the site towards the existing dual gable and facing Rose Hill with the existing boundary wall here. And again, just looking the other way towards neighbouring property number 40 Rose Hill. Part of the wall here has been demolished. The proposals here do seek to erect a replacement wall of the same height with a gate. The proposed parking area itself is existing and remains the same. The Highway Authority have been consulted with regard to the proposals and have commented stating that they've got no objections. Now just looking to the entrance of Rose Hill where you turn off London Road. We've listed building 79 London Road to the right of the photo. The entrance is characterised by these red brick boundary walls and mature trees. Now a further view just to the rear elevation of the dwelling beyond the boundary wall. Now looking the opposite way back towards the London Road in the background with the listed buildings number 79 to 87 in the photograph there. Now looking towards the road junction between Rose Hill and Upper Park Street. Now moving on to photographs taken from view within the rear garden, looking back at the property with various extensions, as you can see, that have been added over time in the foreground. Now panning around to the left, showing the existing substantial sized rear garden. Now looking to the opposite side of the garden towards the rear of neighbouring properties. Members will note that there is quite a level difference between the site itself and neighbouring properties, with the land sloping down towards Rose Hill Cottage. Now looking towards the back left corner of the garden with neighbouring property number 89A London Road to the right of the photograph. Now just a final photo here looking towards the listed buildings on London Road to the rear, towards the left. Now moving on to the existing and proposed plans, first being here just the existing site plan with the existing L-shaped dwelling shown with the landscaping. Now moving on to the proposed site plan. So the replacement dwelling does occupy a similar footprint to that of the existing. The proposals do, however, seek to extend the dwelling to the rear with a flat-roofed rear extension. The proposals also seek to introduce a number of solar panels shown in dark grey. You might just be able to see there on some of the roof slopes and on the flat-roofed rear projection into the garden. The proposals do, as I said, they seek to reinstate the boundary wall and install an electric gate. To ensure that full details of the replacement wall can be considered, a condition has been recommended by officers to provide further detail, and that's in section 9 of the report. With regard to amenity area, the existing dwelling has a rear amenity area of approximately 820 metres squared, and the proposed dwelling would have a garden area of approximately 721 metres squared. This does exceed the guidance set out within the Design Guide SPD, which states that the minimum requirement for a 4-bedroom dwelling is that it should have a garden area of 80 metres squared. With regards to landscaping, a condition has also been recommended for a scheme of landscaping to be submitted along with the requirement for maintenance for a 5-year period. A bat assessment was carried out within the existing dwelling and no bats were found. There was, however, a recommendation for a condition for 2 bat boxes. This has been included in the list of recommended conditions. Now moving to the existing and proposed west elevation. So this is the elevation viewed from the front drive access. I've just highlighted that with an arrow there just so you can see the perspective that this would be. So in this elevation, it has got a similar built form to the existing dwelling where you've got the mix of even ridge heights. The overall dwelling height is broadly similar to the existing dwelling, however the projecting elements, the step down, are enlarged. In terms of facing materials, the replacement dwelling utilises red brick as per the existing dwelling, with articulated features of brickwork shown on the side elevation here. The proposed dwelling will also have natural dark grey slate roof and dark grey UPVC windows rather than the existing white UPVC windows. As we move around to the rear elevations, white render is introduced to the ground floor level. Now looking at the existing and proposed north elevations, this perspective moves around, so we are looking at the gable end of the garage front on. The proposed dwelling here retains a similar overall ridge height, but extends the main part of the dwelling. It also introduces dormer windows to the rear facing roof slope of the garage and a single storey rear projection that you can just see outlined. Now moving to the south elevation. As the arrow just shows, this is the rear elevation of the dwelling which faces towards the properties on London Road. As you can see, the main elevation here is enlarged with an increase in height of the 2-storey projection from approximately 4.45 metres to 7.67 metres. The elevation also includes solar panels on the higher and lower roof slopes that are just outlined on there. You might be able to see. We have recommended a condition that requires the details of the solar panels to be submitted to ensure that they are appropriate given the location in the conservation area. An energy statement has also been submitted which demonstrates the proposals comply with the requirement under SWDP 27 for 10% of the renewable, the dwelling's energy to be generated from renewable or low carbon sources. This is done through the provision of air source heat pumps and photovoltaic panels. This is the only current policy that relates to energy. There is not currently any policy that requires us to consider the gains or losses in carbon as a result of the development considered. Now just the final elevation here, east elevation. This faces out towards the rear garden as the arrow shows, with the dormer windows introduced and the roof slope connected to the main part of the dwelling here. So here the main gable, as you can see there, is widened and windows and doors are inserted. You can also see the outline of the projecting single-storey rear extension just to the right underneath the dormer windows. Now moving just onto the ground floor plans with the proposed rooms laid out. Cycle parking is proposed to be provided within the rear garage, which will be easily accessed from the frontage. So it's therefore considered that this will meet the requirements within the streetscape design guide, as it will be sheltered, secure and easily accessible. Now looking at the first floor plan, as a result of the side extension, the proposed dwelling has more first floor accommodation than the existing, with 4 bedrooms laid out here, 3 with en-suites and a main bathroom. Just to make members aware that I've picked up an error in the report at paragraph 3.1, as it is actually advised in the planning statement that the existing dwelling is 3 bedrooms rather than 2. As the 3rd bedroom is on the lower ground floor, situated adjacent to the garage. When considering the existing and proposed floor areas, the existing dwelling has an overall floor area of 255.9 metres squared, and the proposed dwelling has a floor area of 295.4 metres squared. So this roughly works out at a percentage increase of 15.43%. There have been a number of neighbour objections and comments to the proposals. These are set out and considered in detail in the officer report. with the most prominent concerns being related to heritage and the impact on neighbouring amenity, including disruption during construction, loss of privacy, the scale and massing of the proposed dwelling, and the impact on light to neighbouring properties. It has been carefully considered against the South Worcestershire Design Guide SPD with regard to amenity. With regard to loss of light, the 45-degree code has been carried out and they found the proposals are not in breach. Overall, it is considered that as amended, the design, size and siting would not give rise to overlooking or have an over-dominant or overbearing effect on neighbours. However, to protect neighbouring amenity further, we have recommended a condition for construction environmental management plan, a noise assessment with mitigation required for the air source heat pumps, along with conditions restricting hours of working and deliveries have also been recommended. Regards to design and impact on heritage assets, concerns have been raised by neighbours and the Conservation Area Advisory Panel. It is recognised that the dwelling is of a more modern design than the existing. The existing it replaces. It is nevertheless considered that the proposed dwelling does broadly reflect the character of the original cottage. And as the site is within a conservation area near listed buildings, it is a key consideration. So the Conservation Officer has also been consulted and has raised no objections, but considers that the proposals would result in a neutral impact on the conservation area. They have also considered the impact of the loss of the cottage and considered that the existing cottage would not meet the criteria for statutory or local listing. Conditions, however, been recommended regard to heritage, so for samples of materials, details of the solar panels and the rebuilding of the boundary wall and an archaeology condition. So overall, it's therefore considered that proposals do comply with the NPPF and local policies with regard to heritage. It is recognised it is a finely balanced decision. However, officers have concluded that on balance the development is acceptable as amended, subject to the recommended conditions set out in section 9 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Laura. Okay, so now we're going to go to Ms. Potter. I will time 5 minutes. When it gets about 4:30, I'll wave at you and then you can't go over 5 minutes, okay? And I'll start timing when you start speaking.
Hello, my name's Liz Potter. I live at 38 Rose Hill, which is one of the newer houses that was actually seen in several of the photographs. And thank you for the presentation. I did notice no photographs were taken from my direction. I think there's one taken from London Road, where the houses are a lot further from the existing house, but there were none taken from my house or back garden, which will show how close part of this development would be to my house. Having said that, I've been impressed by the how helpful the paid staff of the planning department have been over this. Well, it seems weird that I'm protesting against the building of £1 million house when on the other side of Fort Royal Hill, the north side, the residents there have been struggling with the presence of a halfway house, but that does show how diverse this area of Worcester is. The Sidbury and Fort Royal Conservation Area was set up in 1980. That's about 15 years after my house was built. And this means, from what I can see, that the council now does have a legal duty to ensure preservation of existing structures. I've been in my house for 35 years. My next door neighbour lived in the street as a child, and one of my other neighbours who's here today has lived in her house for 40 years. So I don't think any of us are NIMBYs on this. Demolishing one of the oldest houses in the area does seem to conflict with stated policy. The house is functional. It's been continuously lived in apart from when the previous owner died and there was an exchange. It seems as structurally sound as the properties of similar age which are scattered around the area. It doesn't have to be a new house to have solar panels put up or heat pumps put in. Several of my friends have done that to their houses. It doesn't seem any reason to knock a house down and build up another one to put in the environmentally friendly stuff. I want to say a lot about the planning application. I've been reliably informed. that are all inaccurate as to facts. This one is certainly inaccurate regarding the footprint. The rebuild plans, as I think you've seen on there, it includes a single-storey gym, although it looks more like a factory. It's going to extend beyond the main house, be directly behind my house and others on Rose Hill. Our gardens are very short, very small. It's going to be looming over us. It's a huge addition to the the current footprint, and how the Zebra architects would say it was mirroring the existing footprint, I do not understand. It'll be far too close to our houses with potential loss of light and noise nuisance. If this really is needed and the planning application goes through, which I hope it doesn't, it would be preferable to build it in the basement, as we'll have to excavate anyway. There's a lot of talk about the need for more housing stock. This really doesn't help much. It will be a bigger house, but the existing one is perfectly adequate for a couple of small family. It has got 3 bedrooms. There are newish properties a few minutes away. You can walk to them in Batten Hall. They can provide the amenity sorts. You could easily add a gym on. They can easily be adapted. It seems no need to demolish this one. There has been some confusion over whether the property is listed or not. It sounds as if it isn't, but even though it's not, it's an elderly property, it's of interest, it's in a conservation area, and it is inhabitable. It is being inhabited at the moment, and I think it should be allowed to remain.
Okay, thank you very much. Do members have any questions, please, for the Councillor Kinsley?
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, if I may. Thank you for your comments. You talked about the house being sort of old and interesting. Are you aware of any stories or histories that you're aware of that particularly relate to this particular structure?
Any other questions, please?
Thank you. Thank you for coming here today to talk to us. I don't know if you know a lot about planning law. I mean, most of us around here, we've all had a lot of training so that we know what the technicalities of planning rules are. And I don't know if you would know that, unfortunately, we can't speculate about what alternatives we might like to see. We have to determine what we've got in front of us. But would that be something you wouldn't know? I thought it was useful to say it, that's all.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Agar. I think that's a key thing that we have to remember all the time with applications. We can only consider what is in front of us. Any other questions? Thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate your time. We'll move to the next speaker. This is Jackie. You have 5 minutes as well, and I'll start it when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. I don't think I need to reply to what has been said, because it's been clarified that we're only here to comment on what is and not to comment about how easy it will be to live in the current house, etc., etc. So I won't waste any more time on that unless you have questions you wish to ask me afterwards. We're here to discuss the plans for a house that will be our long-term home. The Council's Environmental Sustainability Strategy 2020 to 2030 has a laudable aim for Worcester to be a carbon neutral city by 2030. For new homes, it seeks, and I quote, to ensure new homes built have the lowest possible emissions with maximum possible energy efficiency standards and with micro-generations from renewables built in. We have visited low energy passive homes, attended meetings and discussed related topics with experts in this field. This house will be built to passive house levels and is therefore, it should consume at least 75% less heating energy than a conventionally built house and considerably less than the present house. Solar panels and solar charged batteries will supply much of the energy needs. Rainwater will be recycled to water the garden, decreasing water use, and materials from the old house will be repurposed where possible. A great deal of work has gone into the planning process to reach this point. We initially undertook a pre-application inquiry in June 2023, and following broadly supportive officer advice received in July of that year, we progressed a detailed scheme for the replacement dwelling with a firm of local, well-respected architects. The current application was lodged with the Council in February 2024. Following the submissions of consultees and local representations, the scheme was refined in line with the advice provided by officers. It should be stressed that, subject to conditions, there are no objections from all technical consultees, and importantly, given the site's location within a conservation area, the comments provided by the Council's Conservation Officer are supportive. They conclude that the proposal will have a neutral to slightly positive impact upon the conservation area. The revised design has addressed concerns raised by other parties related to massing and scale. Like the Council's Conservation Officer, we consider that the replacement dwellings design is a coherence lacking in the existing property, whilst acknowledging its potential predecessor and reflecting its building surroundings. The conditions recommended by the Council's archaeological advisor for Level 2 building recording will ensure any historic interest is recorded prior to demolition works commencing. We will be employing local tradespeople to work on our project and using locally sourced materials and products wherever possible in the construction work. For example, the bricks from the current house will be reused to form an unsightly boundary wall, which is dilapidated, a wooden one with concrete post-panel structure. This will match the boundary on the other side of the property. This scheme, if permitted, would not adversely impact on the residential amenity of neighbouring properties. The primary two-storey element is centred on the footprint of the existing house and is of similar overall height to the existing house. As such, it would preserve neighbours' privacy and immediate outlook, in accordance with the Council's published guidance document. In conclusion, the proposal before you has been thoroughly assessed by your officers and found to be in accord with the relevant policies within the adopted development plan and national policy framework. The framework of paragraph 11 states that, and I quote, where such circumstances exist, the application should be approved without delay. We urge members of the Planning Committee to follow the recommendation of officers and grant planning permission for our exciting project. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you very much. Has anyone got any questions, please?
Thank you very much for your presentation on that. Obviously, the devil is in the detail, and something is property is an old property, I guess, years old. It will be a sad loss to see it go, but I understand. Now, things like the type of bricks that you use are important. Modern brick is going to look like. Give us some sort of reassurance about the type of bricks. Old bricks or specified type of brick, so there is red brick that's in keeping with all the other houses.
I am sure that your planners will put that to us, that we have to show them the bricks that we're going to use, and I can assure you that we want it to fit in with the area. We're not going to be putting up a modern brick, we're going to be putting up a brick that matches the area. After all, we have got walls that are made of old brick. The last thing you want to do is put shiny new bricks up against those. It just won't look right.
There's a sort of a design feature on the front elevation. You've got the standard bricks, and you've got a sort of central sort of pillar of a different type of brick or a different layout of brick. It wasn't quite clear to us when we looked at the plan. What was the purpose of that, and will that be developed? What is your idea of how that will work?
Can I refer you to the planners there? I think this is something, I may be wrong, that will come in at a later stage when we are showing what we are going to do and how we're going to do things regarding the brickwork. Am I correct in saying that?
Through you, Chair, and to be helpful, the element that I think you're referring to, Councillor Stephen, feature brickwork that has been shown. The detail of that is to be conditioned, so that would include the exact pattern which would be provided, the type of brickwork and how that's going to be done. But it's envisaged that it would be either brickwork on different end or in a different format, so that there's a feature part of that brickwork to break up the monotony of an elevation.
The principle here then, when we are approving applications, why do we not see what the design is going to look like when we come to approve it? Because otherwise we could be approving something which we don't like later on. Surely we should have the design in the drawing so we know what we're approving rather than leaving it.
Through you, Chair, it is something that could be provided, but obviously you're aware that the government advises where there are elements that can be conditioned, they should be, and we would be, it would be unreasonable decision for the council to take a negative decision based upon the lack of information on a specific point, unless there was a very clear reason why that was required. Officers are satisfied that in terms of the design of the property and the impact that it would have in terms of the conservation area, taking account of that public element that we saw on site, of the element that would be seen from the public vantage point, we are satisfied that that can be conditioned and it can be suitably considered by our conservation officer along with officers based upon the heritage concerns that have been raised.
I've got Councillor Ram, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us today about your project. I had two questions, one of which has been answered about the boundary wall and the reuse of the bricks for the boundary wall. My next question is about was talk of an electric gate. Is that correct? Electric gate was going to be at the entrance to the site. Is that correct?
There would be an electric gate, yes.
Right. Just in clarification about that, is the electric gate that you're proposing, is it a sliding gate or is it inward or outwards? Okay. And how will that be electrical? Or
Sorry, what do you mean?
the sliding gate, to make the sliding gate work, is it going to be by a motor, electric, or?
They are electrical, yes.
Right.
So if you're in your car and you're some distance away, you can press a remote and the gate will open prior to you arriving at your property.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Agar, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming in. We have seen you earlier, but of course we couldn't discuss anything with you at the time because the public needs to hear what we have to say in total. So thank you for your courtesy on that. Two things at the moment. I shall have slightly different matters when it comes to the debate, but I'm concerned about walls and adding to what Councillor, what Louis has just said. The replacement wall along the side of the garden, near to the other houses you've been talking about, how high is that going to be, do you think? Is it about the same height as the current fencing?
Documented in the planning document.
I thought it was
It's
perhaps
to
a matter
match
of the design.
The wall at the front of the property will be rebuilt to where it was. That wall was taken down prior to us buying the property.
Oh, no, not that wall, no.
The other wall will be to the height of that fence, yes.
Yes, down the side of the garden.
Yes.
And the wall fronting the road that remains, the bit that's not protected, will you be retaining that?
Councillor Kinsley.
Thank you, Chair. You started your comments with reference to the energy efficiency of the new building, and you're obviously very keen on that, and that's good to hear. Have you undertaken a whole life cycle sort of study of the environmental impact of demolishing an existing house and building a new one, albeit an energy efficient one? But there's obviously quite a lot of impact from those demolishing it and the building of the new. Did you consider that at all?
Put in the pre-application, there was never any query about whether we could demolish or not. We were told we could demolish it and we could rebuild the house. if there had been any suggestion that we really shouldn't be demolishing the house, we would have walked away. We put in that advice in order to find out if it was acceptable. I accept that there are environmental issues involved in knocking a house down and bringing new things onto the site. This house is unlivable. There is condensation streaming down the walls in the bedrooms upstairs. It's been pointed out to me we could put a bathroom in upstairs. We couldn't. The staircase leads directly into the bedrooms. There's nowhere to put one. The floors downstairs are solid concrete. They're cold. There's no insulation underneath them. The previous owner who lived there for a long time, we've heard, she had to get a gas boiler that was completely over-specced for the property in order to keep it warm, and she also had additional heaters. It's a solid wall, solid brick walls. We had lived, before all this property, in a Victorian house for over 30 years. We understand how you can retrofit properties. We've done it. You could not retrofit this property. And that's why we're moving forward to design something that is worthy of the building stock in Worcester and will be a comfortable, enjoyable house to live in with low, low, low energy consumption, the majority of which will be created by solar panels.
Thank you for those comments. So you, in your opinion, you're saying the current house is effectively unlivable. You suggest that you effectively bought it as a plot for a new house to go on.
We didn't buy it until we put in a pre-app. And the pre-app is as I told you.
Any other questions? I've got a couple of questions. On the design of the building, it's predominantly brick, but we do have an extension that's render. I'm wondering why the extension is render, what the decision behind that was.
It purely to differentiate the look of it. It was recommended by the architects, and we couldn't see any reason to criticise it.
And then also, you mentioned Passive House standard, which is
Mentioned
great.
what, sorry?
Passive House standard,
Yes.
which is great. So will you be achieving Passive House accreditation officially?
We're not going to go for Passive House certification, but this will be built to Passive House standards. There is some controversy about going for Passive House certification. If you were building many, many houses, I think it maybe would be appropriate. This will be to that level because the air tightness will be significant to the level of a passive house. And as you know, I'm sure, passive houses are all about being airtight. That is the principle. And then you build on that, because it's airtight, you have lower air changes within that house. And because of that, you have to be wary of condensation. And therefore, you put in MVHR, which has been mentioned already. And therefore, you get the air changed, taken out of those rooms, the heat is recycled and used again within the house. So to us, it makes sense, if you're building a new house, to go for these very high standards, which are much higher than building reg standards.
Thank you. Also, there is a condition for the planting for the scheme, for the project. But I'm just wondering whether you can give us a bit more of a kind of an aspiration of what you're planning for the garden. Because in the conditions it says, you know, tree and plant species. It talks about night flying.
Sorry, my hearing's very poor.
Sorry, it talks about different tree and plant species, night flying insects for foraging bats and all sorts of things. It sounds quite, I don't know whether you've got any plans at the moment.
This project is fantastic for both my husband and myself. His passion is the passive house aspect. My passion is gardens and nature. This is a wonderful garden, and there are very mature specimens within the garden. I don't know if when you walked round, you were able to see all the fantastic plants we have there. I saw a jay in the garden this morning, magpies, everything. I will nurture that garden, and I will encourage wildlife in that garden. And I'm so looking forward to my little grandson coming round, and I can take him in that garden and I can show him how to grow things. I can point out all the animals, and of course we'll put up bat boxes.
Okay, thank you. And just one more thing. Just out of interest, I'm wondering, because you're talking about such an environmental building, I'm wondering whether you're going to vehicles.
Would we put an electric charging point in? Absolutely.
Has anyone got any other questions? Nope. You're free to step back then, thank you. Thank you very much for coming, thank you. We'll open the floor for questions for officers now, please. Has anyone got anything? Start with, let's go, Councillor Udall, Councillor Smith, Councillor Amos, that order, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, I think. I'm a little bit concerned about the application because it is a battle site from the Battle of Worcester. And I noticed that we're not going to be asking for or seeking any form of below ground archaeological activity within the process of the conditions. A pre-construction dig would be quite, because we don't know literally what's going to be underground there, whether it could be battle remains, weapons, or even bodies, putting it bluntly. So I do seek a bit more clarity about what is meant by a level 2 historic building recording, what is meant by the archaeological watch and brief, and how secure that will be to ensure that we do protect what is underground at this site, because, as I said, it is a recognised and registered battle site from the Battle of Worcester days.
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to pick that up. As part of the application submission, there was an archaeology assessment done by Border Archaeology, which has been assessed by our own council's archaeologist. And when you look at the battle sites, archaeology events are scheduled and pointed, and you're quite right in terms of the vicinity is around very clear events. The actual site has no clear definition in terms of any identified sites within this particular area. The archaeologist is very sure that the conditions proposed in terms of the level 2 recording of the building, which is photographs, plans, the detailed elements of how it grew in terms of when it was built, how it was brought forward, and what has happened subsequently, is sufficient in terms of the archaeology. We're not anticipating that there is any below ground, but that's what the watching brief is for, so that as the foundations or any groundworks are undertaken, there will be an archaeologist on site to watch to ensure that there is anything there. Should anything be found, a further archaeological assessment will be required, and that will be part of the overall watching brief.
Just for clarity, for my understanding, what you're suggesting within the conditions under the terms of a watch and brief will require the applicant to have a archaeologist on site during the whole of the process of digging work to identify any problems if and when they occur.
Through you, pretty much, but it won't be on site for the whole amount. It's for very specific elements, so that once you're past a certain level, that you are do a trial pit, etc. Yes, there will be on call, ready to go.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about the original part of the cottage. Is there any good reason why the original part of the building cannot be retained and just the parts which have been added to subsequently demolished? Then the original building could be sympathetically extended with to make a bigger building.
Through you, Chair, and picking that up. I think as we discussed on site, the property is shown on the pre-1900 plans. The property actually consisted, by the appearance of the OS plan, of 2 cottages. One has already been demolished, and what is left is only part of the original cottages for the Rosehill house. It's not something that's before us in terms of the retention. What is before us is the demolition of the property and the consideration of the new property. So we have assessed that application. There has been no reason put forward, but because the application is for demolition and for the replacement of that dwelling. So as part of the planning statement, they have shown why, and I think you've heard from the applicant the reasons why they have chosen that that is the best way forward. So in terms of where we're at an application that is considered for a replacement dwelling on the basis of what the applicant has told us in this room this afternoon.
Thank you.
Councillor Ramos.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Could I just get an answer to just one simple question? It's on the north elevation, which was, I think, one of the first pictures we saw. There's an extension or an addition on the left-hand side of the north elevation. It looks like a toilet block, but I'm sure it isn't. What is it? It's just almost solid concrete with two little windows in. So not concrete, brick, with two little windows in.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, so it was a single-storey rear extension with it does have solar panels on the roof, and I think it is to be used as a garage, as laid out on the floor plans. Sorry, a gym. Sorry, gym.
It's a gym?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. I'll be in there. Fine. Can I ask another couple of questions, really? Just pressing the officers a bit on their recommendation to approve. It's following up something Councillor Stevens said, because it was my question. I'm just a little bit concerned, and I hope it's not the beginning of a trend, whereby we're asked to agree something and the details occur later, not to the committee. So we're asked to approve something that we haven't actually seen. There is a lot of brick. I normally like brick, but in this case, it seems to be a massive brick and grey slate. I don't think it's a very attractive design. I think featureless is the politest word I can use, but that's a matter of personal taste. So it doesn't seem to have much character. But are the officers saying to us, well, when you got the design details, discussions will be had and officers will say, no, that's okay or that's not okay? Because if that is the case, what role does this committee have in agreeing, and I think we should always, Chair, agree the details of what we are going to vote on, not leave it to somebody else. And I'm also a bit concerned, Chair, and perhaps your officers again can clarify whether this is normal, but we've got 5.5 pages of conditions. And now the problem with conditions is that we all know they can be removed, they can be amended quickly and simply without any reference to this committee. And that's what's concerning me. I think we're being asked to take a lot on trust. I don't doubt anybody's word, but I'd rather vote on something I had the details for rather than on the basis of a number of assumptions.
Through you, Chair, and thank you for your questions. In terms of the design as you see it in terms of the overall design is before members. That's not going to change. That is for consideration. The details in terms of the conditions are the exact type of brick. And it would be unreasonable to ask an applicant to actually provide a sample of the brickworks to be able to provide for the committee. That is something that committees are used to being allowed officers to consider as part of conditional detail. So what we have is that we have a red brick and we have a tile property. We have the details that it is going to be a slate and red brick. The exact nature of those red bricks and that tile is something that has been suggested is a conditional item, which again is a normal thing. In terms of Councillor Stevens' question, which I responded to, it was that detail in terms of the breakup, and you'll have seen that on the elevations in terms of that additional detail. Again, that would be, members can see where that's going to be, they can see that it's going to be of a different pattern, and the detail is, what colour is that going to be? And that again is materials for officers to consider. In terms of the number of conditions, there are 16. They're not all pre-start and they're not all details. Some of them are controlling conditions in terms of how the construction is going to take place, along with other things. So, yes, there is 3 pages of them, but 16 conditions on a new property isn't a lot of conditions. We consider that they're appropriate, and we feel that it does make the development acceptable, but I don't think we're asking members to approve or consider something where they haven't got sufficient detail to make that decision.
Thank you, Chair. If I just may follow that with one other point. Are the officers also saying, because I know this has been sold to them as such, that this proposal is environmentally friendly? Because I'm always a bit concerned with a proposal to knock something down, which seems, I could be wrong, but seems functional, it's got character, on the grounds that it's environmentally friendly to do so. Because clearly you've got to get rid of all the spoil, and then you've got to have new materials, using up resources, the environment, bricks, steel, concrete, whatever, to build a new one. So I'm not sure, I could be too simple, but I don't understand how it is environmentally friendly, because the amount of resources that will be used at the end of the proposal will be a net plus. There won't be a negative. So are the officers saying that it's environmentally friendly on those grounds?
Through you, Chair, you'll have read within the report that isn't the line that the officers have taken in terms of their report. In terms of the report, we're considering the property, and we're considering it based upon the policies within the development plan. And I think, as Laura set out within her presentation, there is not a policy within the development plan which requires a carbon neutral position or a carbon consideration. What we are considering is a new building in its location in the conservation area. The elements in terms of environmental accreditation is about the 10% that we look for in terms of renewable energy. And that has been demonstrated by the applicants in terms of their energy requirements. So in terms of where the committee are going in terms of their considerations, that is where the considerations go. We're not recommending approval purely on the basis that it has carbon credentials. It's on the basis that it's a new build, which we feel is appropriate within the conservation.
Thank you, Councillor Amos, for that question, because that's something that I was concerned about. You know, embodied energy of buildings is actually a really important issue. But also, something else that's really important is whole life costing. So for the whole life of a building, how much energy it uses in its life as well. So that's the balance that we have. But at the moment in planning, we can't consider the embodied energy or the demolition. So whether that changes in the future, perhaps. I think it should, but there we go. At the moment, it doesn't. Got any other questions? Who have I got? Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, when we were looking around the building, I found it quite useful to see that when we looked through the windows on the south side, there wasn't actually a wall there because it had been knocked through into the main part of the building. So there wasn't actually very much of the Georgian cottage left from that side. So I don't think there's very much of the Georgian part of it, or however old it is. It's 18 somethings left over. It's disappointing because I would have loved to have seen that structure kept. But on balance, I think it's best to move on. I'm glad that the bricks are going to be used on the north boundary wall. I think that's a big step forward. The pictures, unfortunately, showed 2 different colour bricks, and I'm sure that that's what colleagues were concerned about at the time. And no, when you come to planning committee and you see 2 colour bricks on a picture, then I think I'm reassured that it's only going to be 1 colour brick now. So that's a great step forward as well. So on balance, I'm prepared to go with this application. It's a shame because I'd hate to see any elderly building that could still be used go, especially in Worcester where so much was demolished in the 60s and 70s. You know, we lost a lot then, and any building that goes now is a deficit.
Yeah, Thank you, Councillor Barnes. That makes me think, actually, with the condition for the brickwork, you're talking about how you think there's only one colour at the moment. I don't know if that's right. But also, the condition talks about the details, type, colour, texture, finish of the proposed brickwork. One thing that I think is important with brickwork is actually the mortar colour as well. Mortar colour on our buildings tends to be more muted. I wonder whether within that condition we could actually ask to see a sample panel including the detail, but making sure it includes the detail that we're looking for. Just make sure we include that detail of that feature panel on it, to include the feature panel, that addition, so that Councillor Stevens' point, Councillor Barnes' point is picked up with the how the bricks are. And I'm probably jumping ahead a bit, but I'm just, while we're talking about it, I thought I'd mention.
Through you, Chair, just to cover that off, if it's helpful, members, condition 9 could be expanded so that specific elements of render, A, and brickwork, B, along with, sorry, I'm talking ahead of myself. It just needs that point E is expanded to say, rather than a sample of the proposed brickwork, that is a sample panel,
Yeah,
which would be a metre by a metre,
yeah.
including any mortar details. So that would be provided on site
And the
for
feature panel.
and for the feature panel. So that would need to be expanded, but that can be done.
Yeah. Councillor Stephen?
While we're on that subject, then, so the other thing that wasn't really, again, no detail about solar panels on the thing, it just says solar panels. So be a big difference between grey and might fit understated panels, industrial looking solar panels, glossy and give quite a big reflection. So again, that would be quite nice to have that conditioned so that you, as officers you're able to, I'm sure you're probably going to do this anyway, but make sure alongside with the bricks and so on.
Through you, Chair, to give you comfort, condition 10, which starts on page 36 and runs over to 37, is more than what we would normally do. It asks for size, orientation and arrangement. It asks for colour of the frame edge of the solar panels. It talks about the type, colour, texture and size of the roofing materials around the solar panel. So actually we're looking at quite a lot of detail, more than just the normal. So hopefully that's provided some comfort.
We're jumping ahead a little bit, but with the solar panels, of course, at the moment, they're shown in plan, on the roof plan. They're not shown on the elevations. So councillors visualise them on the elevations, I suppose. They're not on the elevations facing the public road, I believe. So they're inward on the site. I've got Councillor Round now, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a very interesting application. I can see how we're quite conflicted in terms of our desire to approve applications and be mindful of the local conservation area, but also recognising that this building perhaps has been neglected for some time and the historical significance that it may have had has diminished through lack of care, really, for want of a better reason. I agree with what Councillor Stephen is saying in terms of the brick structure, but I think we're sort of addressing that really going forward. I do have a reservation, and I did raise this with the applicant about the electric gate. I'm not an expert, but I've heard a number of them and they are really noisy. Can anything be done about that too for the sake of nearby residents, or is that not a concern with officers, or can you perhaps give me some reassurances?
So are you saying that they're noisy when they open and shut?
Open and shut, yeah,
Okay.
they can be quite noisy, and they are a nuisance for neighbours.
Right, okay.
Through you, Chair, because of the infrequency of how often they'll be opening and closing, you would expect there to be a maintenance requirement, but it won't be a noise that would be such that would require a statutory nuisance. Not in the same way that, as you'll notice within the conditions got a condition about noise for the air source heat pump. The fact that it might squeak is a maintenance issue rather than a noise issue. But I'm sure the applicants will take that on board as part of their consideration.
I've got Councillor Agar, please.
Thank you, Chair. For three things. I'd like to see a bit more clarity on condition 12, because it does talk about the proposed front wall, but it's really only talking about the bit that's knocked down as far as I can tell. And I'd like really us to include in the condition the fact that the other section of wall with a nameplate on it, fronting the road, is retained, the bit that's not protected at the moment. So if we could include that in the condition and ensure that the height of the new sidewall where the concrete posts and whatever are now is about the same height at least of the existing boundary treatment. That wall would be, it would screen the neighbours quite effectively.
You're suggesting a minimum height or a
I think a minimum height, really. It should be about the same height as the existing wooden fencing.
or screening?
Yes.
Through you, Chair, just in terms of the clarity on that, members will be aware that the fencing that exists at the moment can be replaced without needing planning permission, development rights. So what the applicants are proposing is not development before us, and I would be concerned about controlling that where it's not development, because it's taking more control over development than we probably should. So in terms of the reasonableness, if members wish to do that, they would need to satisfy themselves that there was a need. So the fence would be replaced with a wall which wouldn't be any greater than 2 metres in height under permitted development rights. So they could do that without requiring planning permission anyway. But if members felt that it was important to be able to provide a solid boundary to those neighbouring properties, it is something that they could condition. But I'm just advising that actually those works aren't part of the application because they don't require planning permission.
Yes, I appreciate that, but I think the neighbours might well appreciate the amenity value of their gardens being protected, and the lower part of their properties cannot be viewed from the nearby garden if that happens. So I would have thought that the impact on the amenity value of neighbours would be improved by doing something like that. That was my thought. But the front wall, I simply wanted to see a consistency along that stretch of wall.
Just for clarity, so in terms of the retention of the wall, comment I didn't say, the retention of the wall of the previous wall, very reasonable in terms of that certainly is well if members see fit. My comment was purely about again, if that's a consideration for members.
Okay, thank you. And I was just pleased to see the back boxes and so forth, the level of energy efficiency. I mean, I appreciate very much the comments that have been made by you, Chair, and by Councillor Stevenson about carbon release, and we just can't do anything about the carbon release of a building being knocked down. There just isn't the policy at either national or local level. In my view, there needs to be a national policy. So that's something we perhaps should lobby for in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Agar. I've got Councillor Tessera now, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I went on the site visit today, which is very useful, helpful. In my heart, I always want to think about preserving old buildings because I love them. This particular one is not especially lovable, in my view. It is quite dilapidated and in need of being replaced. So I don't mourn its loss on this occasion. I would have hoped, personally, if the new plan was a little bit more exciting than the current one, but that's not a planning consideration, so leave that where it is. But it is good it's going to be environmentally friendly. Balance.
Thank you, Councillor Sarah. I've got Councillor Kinsley now, please.
Chair. Just want to again ask a point of clarification. I'm looking at the proposed floor plan and sections. And sections A at the bottom of the page, sections AA and sections BB show I can't in my mind reconcile how they look with the exterior view, and I just want reassurance that it does work. It shows the roof offset to the understories with a bit of a sort of a 900 mil gully. I'm just wondering how that works. Does that mean that there's a part of that side which is pushed out?
Sorry, Councillor, could you just repeat the
Yeah.
your concern? Now I've got the plan in front of me.
Yes, sure. So, you've got the right document. So if you look at where it says sections AA and sections BB, and then it shows you in on the above diagram where those cross sections are, and it just doesn't seem to square away with the outside part of it, which shows walls in line with the roof.
So through you, Chair, I think the Chair has correctly identified, because the pitched roofs are going in different directions, that's why you've got that in that format. So you've got one pitch which is coming towards you and one pitch that is going sideways.
Okay, so it will look as it appears externally then? No, AA doesn't. But AA also shows that gully.
AA is showing it from the outside. B is showing it just taking it through. The other one is. It probably doesn't help that I don't know if you're looking at it digitally, on the printed version, the elevation of the brick is, of the roof isn't very rendered. Don't know if that doesn't help. Yeah.
I'm reassured. If you, I can't quite picture it myself, but if you're
Yeah.
telling me, actually, that is going to work with how it appears externally.
Yeah,
Quick
yeah,
question.
do. Yeah.
And under the conditions, you talk about restricting the hours of work for the construction. And I think at the moment it says 8 till 6. Look at reducing those, considering.
Through you, Chair, we discussed this on site, and it's open for members, based upon their site visit and consideration of the applications, to consider alternative hours. However, I would request that members consider it to be reasonable. So if they do consider it, that is a matter for you, but again, just being reasonable to the applicants to make sure that they can do what they need to do.
Yeah, Councillor Kinsley, I think when we were on site, we did notice that actually it's a really quiet area, and actually having, loud noise at 8 o'clock is probably not very conducive to relationships with neighbours. What would be a reasonable time not interfere with, like, people trying to get out of that road? Would it be like after a school run, or something? Would that be unreasonable? So after 9. About in the afternoon. Because at the moment it says 6.
The thing is that also when you've got vehicles there, people trying to get past for the houses where they struggle. So if people coming to and from work is.
Through you, Chair, and hopefully to be of assistance. You'll notice within condition 6 that we've got a construction environmental management plan. And as part of that, the applicants will be providing a phased approach in terms of how they're going to be doing that. So I'm informed by the applicants that they are considering, in terms of the details of that, providing demolition in the first instance, so that there is a clear site, so that they can operate entirely within the site, so that operatives won't be parking on Rose Hill. So in terms of getting in, it may be something that members wish to consider, but in terms of going past, I think 6 o'clock, I think is a reasonable amount of time. It may be that members wish to tweak the construction works rather than including deliveries in condition 7. We limit that members consider that deliveries are taken out of 7 and it's just construction works that commence, say, at 8:30, I think would be reasonable, and then deliveries would be from 9 o'clock. And it might be, as members have considered previously, that there is a set inside that no deliveries take place between, for instance, 2:30 and 3:30 to avoid any school traffic. But it's entirely up to members how they wish to play this.
Has anyone got an opinion on that? Seeing nods.
Not so much the noise that concerned me, Chair, it was the safety aspect as well. It's very
Yeah,
narrow.
I think you're right. I think the safety aspect is really important. But also noise. And I think we do have, having a set time for starting is really important, and if it's contravened, we can take action. That's really important. Who was talking? Have you finished? Got one more, go on.
One last point. I'm sorry, and it's a very general point. I'm asking about conditions which sort of suggest that I'm in favour of this development and this application, which I'm afraid I'm not. I worry that, and I know it's difficult, we're constrained by our planning regulations, but I'm worried that we are saying to people it's okay to buy a house in Worcester that they might regard as slightly uncomfortable to live in and knock it down and put something new in. And it's our job here to be looking after the character of Worcester. Now, this may not be something that we say, right, okay, this is a massively important part of the character, but you take it in its cumulative impact. And it does worry me, the message that we would be giving by approving this application. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose, Councillor Kinsley, we have to look at what the Conservation Officer said, what the Conservation Panel have said, and I think there's something to do with balance, isn't there, here, that we were talking about earlier.
Happy to do so, Chair. And I think, Councillor Kinsley, officers, you will have seen, and I think the applicant mentioned, that this application hasn't been turned around probably as quickly as we would normally do, because officers have taken that time to make sure that this has been considered properly. So whilst there is a message that is being sent out, I think hopefully the message that other members of the public will see is that the City Council don't take the demolition of buildings in conservation areas lightly, and that due consideration will be given to that and pushback in terms of design and its impact, and ensuring that it is the right design in the right place and that the building has been examined fully. So the heritage statement that has been commissioned, the archaeology statement that has been, we have now all the details we need in terms of the history of the building to say, actually, we don't feel that it is so significant that it warrants being protected. So if the message is that when you're coming to apply to the City Council, you're going to have to go through significant hoops before you get to a planning committee that recommends approval, hopefully that's the message that's gone out, rather than we will just accept anything. And I don't think that's hopefully the message that's being put out. This is one on balance, and the Chair has said that already, and we discussed that on site, and again, Laura put that at the end of her presentation in terms of it is finely balanced, but considering everything altogether, we consider that approval is the right thing to do to be able to bring up the quality of the housing stock. But actually, we can do that because we know where the building is, we know the history of the building, and we know that it is not something that is so special that needs to be retained. It's a new chapter for the site, and it can bring forward actually some enhancements, because I think the Conservation Officer says a neutral impact to slight enhancement. So we were actually looking at slight improvement in terms of the conservation area based upon the building's quality that it sits there at the moment. So that's where we're at, and hopefully that's the message that's coming out.
I've actually got Councillor Udall now, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I share the view of the Conservation Officer, to be honest. We've got to expect to have new construction and new styles of building, as well as preserving the old. So I do think we need a balance. And I apologise in advance for my question in case it's covered someone I haven't read it. It's a replacement of one two-storey building for another two-storey building. But the pictures which we've seen, the diagrams we've seen, doesn't actually give information about the actual height of the buildings. I think you may have covered this on site, but I wasn't there. Can you confirm it's the same height as the previous building? And if that's the case, what propositions and protection can we have in place to ensure a future owner or occupier of this site will not expand upwards into loft bedrooms, expanding the number of bedrooms considerably, which would have an impact on highways if that was the case?
Through you, Chair, if you just wanted a bit of clarification on the existing and proposed heights, I can do that for you. So I've just taken the overall ridge height of the existing dwelling, and that's come back as 8.14 metres, whereas the proposed is 8.53. So there is a slight increase, but it's, you know, relatively minor increase. Different elements, as you'll see from the plans, have been increased, you know, the step down area and the garage, but it is broadly similar in terms of its overall ridge height.
And then I'm going to pick up your second question. We hadn't forgotten. So, through you, Chair, in terms of what safeguards, at the moment, you'll notice within the conditions, there is no restrictive condition in terms of permitted development rights. So, again, it's a consideration for members based upon the visual appearance, but also in terms of any impact, whether they consider that specific permitted development rights are removed. And again, I would say specific rather than blanket permitted development rights. So, for instance, of dormer windows or further extensions to the property, that might be something that members consider in the round. Obviously, in terms of if they were to use the roof space without putting a dormer window on, that's not something that would require planning permission in any event, but it might be something that members consider is warranted in terms of removal of specific permitted development rights.
I think that might be a very good idea, Chair. I think dormer windows on this site in the future, I'm not talking about current potential occupiers, but potential future owners, I think we need to have that restriction in place to protect that from happening.
Councillor Udall, it's something we were, not specifically that, but we on site, we did notice the level difference between the site and the surrounding area. And in fact, the roof is going to be a bit lower, isn't it? And if you put windows in it, it would be more in line with the other windows opposite. So that would actually impact the distance, wouldn't it, that really the house should be from the boundary. So I think that's really important, actually. So I'm quite happy. Are other people happy for that to be added? Are you done, Councillor? Thank you. That's all right. Yeah, I know. Councillor Stephen?
I'd like to speak in favour of approving this application. It's not a listed building. Basically, it's a building that's been there for well over 100 years. With lots of different additions over many years. And it's not a good example of a pretty beautiful building. It isn't. I think what is being proposed is something which will effectively tidy up which has been developed in a way for very many years. And I do understand that obviously one of the best ways of preserving properties is to use them. But when you've got a property where it's very difficult to put in the modern things that we need these days to conserve energy and so on, with the solid floors, the solid walls and so on. You know, this building's done good service for probably 140 years, but we're building the infrastructure for the future, which will be here for another 100 years. It does need to be done to a high standard. I don't think it's possible to preserve the existing building and to build around it, because by its very nature of those solid walls and the solid floors, it's impossible to make it to the high standard that we would expect modern building. And I think the other thing that I would say is that the applicants, I think, have done a very good example where they've done a pre-application, they've taken advice, they've put an application, then worked with officers over a period of months or more, with proposals and counter-proposals, taking advice. It seems that they've taken that advice forward with this proposal, which now I think is at a point where it's acceptable to approve it. So, application.
Thank you, Councillor Stephen. It's a really interesting point, isn't it? Retrofit. There are examples of terraced housing being made. But obviously, at this building, as you say as well, and as people say, like today, it was very significant, actually, the number of little extensions and stuff that was surrounded that the big building in the middle, and actually it's not even size building. So yeah, thank you for your comment. Did I have Councillor Rudge?
You did, Chair, yes, thank you. Could I just clarify, 7.16, the Conservation Area Advisory Panel comment, concerns were raised in relation to the single-storey wing sitting incongruously with the remainder of the building. Have those concerns been addressed, do we think, from a planning point of view? Because that seemed to be the only thing that sort of stood out to me. That bit looks ugly. It's sort of add-on, and I don't know whether it's an add-on because, I don't know, maybe sometimes they in the future they can build on it and extend it and build upwards, or what. I just wonder whether those concerns have been addressed.
Through you, Chair. They have been addressed through the revised plans. Previously, the element that they talked that looked that was jarring was at two-storey level. That has been reduced down to garage element. So we are satisfied that those comments have been addressed, and that's one of the elements that the applicants took away and worked on and brought back with a revised design. We're satisfied that the conservation area haven't provided.
Do I have any other questions?
Sorry, it's a very final comment from me, which is that I'd really like to ensure that via condition, presumably, that the flat roof element cannot be turned in future into a terrace or balcony, because it would overlook neighbouring gardens. But otherwise, I appreciate Councillor Kinnersley's point of view, and it is a very subtle planning balance that comes out neutral. And it took me some time to decide what I would do about it. But I've come to the conclusion that I would support the building of this with all the conditions we've attached to it to try and make it the best we can of it for everyone concerned. So I would be happy to second Councillor Stephen's proposal.
So, Councillor Stephen, was that a proposal? That was a proposal. Okay, so we'll have Paul clarify the condition amendments.
So, members, as part of the debate, just so that everyone's aware, it was suggested that condition 7 deals with purely just construction operations on site, which are 8:30 till 6 o'clock on Monday to Friday only. that deliveries in condition 8 is amended so that it is 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. on Monday to Friday, with the exception of the hours between 2:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon. That condition 9 is amended at point E to include a sample panel of brickwork, including a sample panel of the feature brickwork. That condition 12 is included the retention of the existing front wall. An additional condition 17 for the removal of permitted development rights for Class B, which is for dormer windows, which would be to the rear. As in the conservation area, you can't have dormer windows to the front in any event, but that would be removal of dormer windows across the whole of the property. And an additional condition 18 for the prevention of the flat roof building being used as a roof terrace. Officers would suggest that that condition includes that access to the flat roof is only for maintenance purposes only, so that the applicants can maintain their solar panels rather than being in breach of the condition for walking on the flat roof. So those are the amendments that I think I've picked up in terms of the debate.
Okay, based on that, are we happy to go to a vote? Yep, okay. So please, may I see all votes in favour? Okay, all votes against? Is that everyone? Has that everyone voted? Yep, okay, so that is carried with those amendments to the planning. Thank you, everyone. We're going to have a comfort break now. If we come back in 10 minutes, please, which will be at Right, everybody, we're back. We're back live. Can we go on to the next application, please? This is number 8. It's for Coma Gardens, and the presentation is from Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 8 concerns the planning application at Coma Gardens Community Centre, 14 Coma Gardens, application reference 24/00490/FUL. Planning permission is sought for a change of use of the first floor from a single residential unit, use class C3, to a community use, use class F2, to enable the first floor to be used as part of the existing community centre. A single-storey rear extension is also proposed. In terms of the site location, the property is situated on the eastern side of Coma Gardens, close to the junction with Oldbury Road, in a predominantly residential area. The site contains a 2-storey detached property, which is in use as a community centre at ground floor level with a 1-bedroom flat at first floor level. The site is not within a conservation area, but the property is a locally listed building. The building was originally constructed as Coma Gardens Institute in 1906 and was used by a local school. Following the closure of the school in 1984, the building became a community hall with a single flat created at first floor. The property is constructed in red brick with terracotta and stone details. The site location and plan is shown on the slide. The next slide shows an aerial view of the property and the surrounding area. The next slide shows a photo of the front elevation of the property. And this slide shows the area to the rear of the property where the single-storey rear extension is proposed. This slide shows the existing ground and first floor plan. And this slide shows the proposed ground and first floor plan, including the ground floor rear extension and the internally reconfigured first floor plan. This slide shows the existing and proposed north and east elevations with the addition of the proposed single-storey extension. So the key issues to consider in the determination of the application are the acceptability of the proposals having regard to the principle of development, design and conservation considerations, impact on neighbouring amenity and highway considerations. In terms of the principle of development, a change of use of the first floor of the building is proposed from its existing use as a 1-bedroom flat, use class C3, to community use, use class F2, to be part of the existing Coma Gardens Community Centre, which currently occupies the ground floor of the building. The first floor flat was previously used as social housing. Although the loss of a social housing unit is regrettable, it should be noted that the first floor flat has been vacant for a number of years and is in a state of disrepair, requiring full refurbishment and modernisation. This slide shows photos of the existing first floor flat, which is currently in a state of dilapidation, as can be seen in the photos. As an isolated unit of accommodation, platform housing and the council considered that it is not practical for a social landlord to manage. Its location above the existing community hall raises the potential for conflict and safeguarding issues. Taking into account these circumstances, sufficient justification has been provided for the loss of the residential unit at first floor. Given the existing use of the ground floor as a community hall, it makes sense to expand the existing community facilities and incorporate the first floor into community use as part of the existing community centre. The expansion of the community centre and proposed creation of a function room at first floor would mean that there would be spaces for multiple groups to hire at the same time and would facilitate a diversity of activities the hall can support. The expansion of the existing community centre would benefit the local community as it would allow for more activities to take place. The principle of the proposed change of use of the first floor from use class C3 residential to use class F2 community use is therefore considered to be acceptable. With regard to design and conservation considerations, the proposed single-storey rear extension is considered to be of a suitable size, design and appearance. The proposed materials are shown to match those in the existing single-storey extension. A condition is attached requiring further details of the proposed external materials to be submitted for approval to ensure that the materials are appropriate to the locally listed building. The proposed extension is modest and impacts most on fabric added after 2003. The proposed extension would not have any adverse impact on the locally listed building and is acceptable in conservation and design terms. This slide shows the existing and proposed first floor plan. Internal alterations are proposed to the first floor to create a function room of approximately 40 square metres, a kitchenette and a WC. Internal walls, partitions and doors would be removed to create the function room, as can be seen on the plans. The proposed internal alterations to the first floor are considered to be acceptable in conservation and design terms and would not have any unacceptable impact on the locally listed building. In terms of impact on neighbouring amenity, the proposed single-storey rear extension would not result in any unacceptable loss of daylight, sunlight or outlook to neighbouring properties. There would also be no unacceptable increase in overlooking or loss of privacy to neighbouring properties as a result of the proposed extension. The ground floor of the property is in existing use as a community centre. The proposed expansion of the community centre through the change of use of the first floor may result in some increase in numbers of people attending the premises at any one time. However, given the relatively modest size of the first floor, the increase in attendees is not likely to be significant and should not result in any adverse impact on neighbouring occupiers. With regard to highway matters, there is no car parking associated with the existing community centre and no car parking is proposed as part of this application. However, there are parking restrictions and time-limited parking bays fronting the site, which would limit displacement parking. Also, the location is easily accessible by active travel modes within the area, plus there is a bus stop diagonally opposite the site. There is no personal injury accident record in this area to indicate any highway safety concern, and the proposal will not result in a severe impact on the local highway network. The community centre currently does not have any existing cycle parking. New cycle parking in the form of 4 Sheffield stands is proposed to the front of the property as part of the application. This is considered a betterment over and above the existing situation. The proposals are therefore considered to be acceptable with regard to highways considerations. So one support comment has been received from a member of the public regarding the application and there's been no objections. Officers have concluded that subject to the recommended conditions, the proposals are acceptable with regard to the principle of development and design and conservation considerations and would not have any unacceptable impact on neighbouring amenity or highways matters. Officers therefore recommend that the application is granted subject to conditions. And this concludes the officer presentation.
I'm just wondering, before we open the floor, the notes on that drawing that were up are really, really tiny. Are they indicating what the materials are? Because I can't actually. Matching brickwork, okay, and the roof is a matching roof as well. Okay, does that help people? I've first of all got Councillor Round, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just would wonder if I could have some clarification from the officer, please. I know there's no car parking and we're proposing to encourage active travel, which obviously should be encouraged. However, I'm concerned about access to those who are living with disabilities and long-term health conditions. I'm not familiar, is there any disabled car parking bays on the road allocated at all to the hall?
I don't believe so. I don't believe that the community hall has any existing parking.
Is that something that we should or can, or as part of the planning committee, be looking at from a highways point of view? Because I just think that this is a community centre and all members of the community, whether they're able or not able, should be able to access a community room. So I just wondered if we could have some comments as to what we can do to encourage it, because I'm always concerned about accessibility for everybody in Worcester.
Through you, Chair, it's a really good question. Because there is no on-site parking and it's purely on-street parking, it's obviously outside the City Council, who's the applicant's control, to be able to do that. There's obviously some lobbying that ward members could do in terms of to the County Council to ensure that disabled bays are provided within the on-street parking bays, but at the moment that's not provided. In terms of what we can do in terms of the application, we can't require that because it's outside the application site.
Yeah, really good point, Councillor. Councillor Udall.
Thank you, Chair. It's a similar point. I fully support this application, but it doesn't mean that I don't have some concerns, and it's relating to the issue of parking. outside the area. If I've got the experience of another community centre, which is the Green Centre, it does attract a lot of vehicles from a lot of people coming from quite a considerable distance. And I am concerned that the expansion of community space is going to do the same here, which will have an impact farther and further than just this area, especially into Solitaire Avenue and parts of St John's. So I do wonder what more we can do to actually prevent that from happening. One idea, and I would seek advice from officers, is as this is a community centre, to ensure that there are no commercial bookings, which may actually limit from people from outside the area coming in, and it's used exclusively by the local community. But that's not something, I'm not sure that's something which we could condition, whether it's something which we can actually consider in another place. But commercial bookings do attract people from much further afield, and I would be concerned about that.
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to answer that question. Again, I think it's a really useful thought, and the fact that councillors are thinking about the impact of development is really helpful. This application, we're not looking at the whole building. The difficulty we've got is we've just got the upper space. So where officers got to in terms of the considerations is that we have a residential unit that has a parking requirement, and then we have new floor space which has a parking requirement, and they cancel each other out. So actually we're looking at the position that there's no increase in parking displacement. And if members were looking at introducing a condition, it would be to the first floor only, and it would be, I would be advising that that may not be reasonable in position of... But I think Councillor Udall says that it might be for somewhere else, and I would agree wholeheartedly that it might be somewhere else as part of those considerations.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Udall, I was looking at the comments, and it says the Coma Gardens Community Centre is the only community asset in St Clement. So I would expect that a lot of users are actually going to be local people, hopefully walking. I hope so, and that could be what they have now, and because it is a community centre now, and that's the way they cope. Actually, you know, perhaps Councillor Kinsley.
Thank you. Maybe if I can come in there. I mean, firstly, I think as Councillor Udall knows, there is quite a lot of extra parking along Aldby Road, which is marked off and quite often is available. However, there's also one of the busiest Beryl Bike bays quite close to the centre, and I wonder if we could ask the community centre to actively encourage people going there and to say, look, actually the Beryl bikes are there, and the parking is, if you're going to park on the road, there is further parking around the corner, which is available, so they're not impacting on local residents.
Through you, Chair, I think probably outside the planning application process, but that's certainly something that we can pass back on to the applicant, who will raise it with the Clover Gardens Community Centre management group.
Okay, I've got Councillor Stephen, please.
Thank you. Just building on the point that Rand raised earlier about access for those with disabilities. I'm not familiar with the building and current usage. There's on the drawings, there's a picture of a red door with the side elevation. I'm not quite sure whether this is going to be a main entrance to the hallway or not. And it appears from when you just look at the picture, it looks as if the red door is a little bit up, so maybe there's a step. So it's got a question about wheelchair access. Is it wide enough? Is there a step? Is this a main entrance, or is there actually an existing entrance from the front already? I don't know, but just clarify on that. What's the main purpose of this door? Is it a fire exit, or is there a main entrance? Is it accessible for all users? So it looks like there's a bit of a step on the door.
Through Chair, if you can just bear with me a minute, I'll be able to provide it. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I do know this building a bit because I've been to meetings in it over a period of time, and the I understood that there was going to be a lift fitted so that people could access the first floor, and that doesn't appear on this application. So I wonder whether that's been scrapped for whatever reason. There's obviously anybody who uses the first floor would have a real problem. Now, we talk about disability access of transport, but once you're in the building, if you can't get up to that level, there's not much point. There is a bus stop outside. I got to the venue by bus, so I do know that very well. But, and of course, buses generally allow a certain level of access for disabled people. But if you go into the building and there's a flight of stairs, then no matter how brilliant the space is upstairs, you won't be able to use it necessarily.
Members, through you, Chair, I can come back to Councillor Stephen in terms of his query. The single-storey extension that's shown is not the main entrance. There is another entrance which leads to the lobby, and that, I believe, appears to be the main entrance. So we're not looking at approving anything that's causing an issue for disabled users or accessible users into the building by virtue of that extension. It's not, it's a secondary entrance. Well, it's almost like a service entrance that leads into the rear of the property towards kitchens and if I can come back to Councillor Barnes in terms of the lift, we haven't seen a proposal for a lift. That doesn't mean that that might not appear at a future time in terms of the layout. What we're establishing here is the upper floor. So, but that's not before members' proposal. And in fact, that probably wouldn't require planning permission to get the change of use.
I've got Councillor Agar, please.
Thank you. Yes, I was concerned about disabled access to the building. Under the Equalities Act, we actually are supposed to enable reasonable access, even where a building is having to be retrofitted because it's a heritage building or whatever. Now, this is locally listed, I think, isn't it? But I would have thought that the very least we would have, we should condition a stair lift or better. Because in nearly any building you can get one of those in, if nothing else. But I would have thought that, you know, some kind of lift like the one at the back of here, if that were possible, would be better yet. Can we do that?
Through you, Chair, we've got to be careful that we're not straying into the requirements under building regulations. That will be something that will be considered as part of the building regulations. They will have to, under Part M of the building regulations, accessible the building is. An accessibility statement will have to be provided for building regulations. As I responded earlier, we're looking at the change of use of the building. The building is accessible to the ground floor. They will have to consider how to do that. It's certainly not something for the planning committee to specify how that is done. It will be something that is covered under the building regulations, and I think my advice would be to members is that they should have some comfort that that is going to be done under building regulations. And again, given the nature of the applicant, it is something that members could have some influence over in terms of other places within the council.
Thank you. I mean, I would definitely like to see us write to building regs about it.
Thank you, Councillor Agar. Excellent. Councillor Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say how pleased I am to see a community centre developing rather than closing down. So, notwithstanding any needs for disabled access, which I really hope can be accommodated, certainly, the very fact that there's going to be more community use has got to be a good thing, even if not everybody can access it. If lots of people can, that's a good thing in itself. And yes, disability access would be also fantastic.
Yeah, Thank you, Councillor Sarah. Yeah, I was really struck by the photographs of the existing flat, actually. So it's absolutely horrific. That is not the kind of space we want people to live in, is it? And I'm thinking of, like, you know, I know a dance school goes there and you're living up above it. How the hell could that person live in a nice place? So it is a shame to lose social housing, you know, but actually that's probably the wrong place for it. And it was in extremely poor condition. But I suppose no one's lived in it a long time, so that's great. We've got Councillor Round again.
I forgot what I was going to say. I think, yeah, I agree with, yes, it's really great to see the change of use and with what all the comments that you've made, Chair, but I do agree with what Councillor Agar has said about accessibility is incredibly important. It's always as an add-on, and so many people in our community are unable to access community facilities. So it's regardless when they get there, you know, it's the access to the site itself, but when they're in there, I've noticed that the toilets is I don't know, it's going to be dealt with by building regs, but often, again, as an afterthought, it's always, you know, anything will do, and it's not acceptable for people in our community to be denied access. And I think Councillor Agar's suggestion that we should be, as a committee, following this through, you know, one of my big bugbears is people go, oh, well, we can put in a stair lift or something like that. So many people are still denied access because they have mobility scooters and they cannot access the lifts because the weights cannot take the lifts cannot take the weight of those scooters. So I think as a committee, we need to be setting a bit of a precedent to say, you know, we should be aiming for higher standards as a council.
Yeah, sure, Councillor Omer, you're absolutely right. I'm just questioning because I can see that the WC is quite big. Is that a disabled toilet, perhaps?
Through you, Chair, in terms of the first floor, I believe that is, it looks both in terms of the door widths and also the size of the WC, that it is a large enough area. But also on the ground floor, which isn't subject to the planning application, but there is an accessible toilet as part of that on the ground
I've got Councillor Rudge.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, 7.5, it does state that the expansion of the community centre, blah, 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 more spaces for multiple groups to hire at the same time. It seems to me that what they're trying to do is add more space so that they can add a variety of different activities and add in a variety of different groups, but still retain the ground floors, which presumably is accessible for wheelchair users, and by the sound of it, has got toilets as well. So I don't think people are necessarily being denied. It's just that they may be restricted by not being able to access the first floor, I think.
And I suppose what we're saying is that in this application, there is no lift shown. There could be a stair lift done anyway, but there could be a proper lift put in at another time. Is that what we're saying? But that's not what we're considering today. Councillor Kinsley?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that I think it's my recollection that I think the downstairs is very accessible and has an accessible level doorway. So that's good. In terms of the upstairs and what we're considering, having been there, I do know the current stairs are extremely steep, and I know they're having to do something with the staircase. So, and I strongly suspect that they will be very open to doing everything they can to make it accessible, which we would support. What wouldn't want to see is the development of the upstairs being put in sort of jeopardy by asking for something that, because it isn't, they are quite restricted in space and what they can do. So a stair lift may well be feasible, but beyond that, it could be, you know, make the whole scheme unworkable, which would be a huge shame. As other members have said, we're returning this building to what it was originally, which was a marvellous community resource. But I would say the people running the building are very keen on doing all they can.
Councillor Udall?
Yeah, Chair, I fully support the application as we have in front of us and go as far as to say I would move the recommendation. But but there have been some legitimate concerns raised which are outside the scope of the application. I do wonder, because I believe the applicants are a nice bunch of people. I do wonder whether it's appropriate or possible or even relevant or even, yeah, possible for us to communicate to them the concerns this committee have had in the form of a letter and ask them to consider addressing these. It's got nothing in connection with approval of the committee, but it will draw the attention to another committee of this council, the requests and feelings of this committee. And I do wonder how possible that would be, without giving them without using any forceful or conditions to do so. It's just a friendly letter of communication.
Yeah, sure. Can we do that?
Through you, Chair, and I'm looking maybe for some legal help a bit later, but it's of course possible for the Planning Committee to write to the appropriate director to be able to make them aware of those concerns. And if that was the concerns in terms of the accessibility to the upper floors and also for accessible parking, that is something, and the restriction of commercial uses, that is something that if the committee wished to go, I'm sure that the chair would be happy to have a look at a draft that could be agreed, that could be sent to the appropriate director. I don't know whether Steph's got anything to add to that.
The only thing I will say, management committee, so I think in terms of restricting I mean, I would go so far as to say I imagine that the applicant may well be watching, but yeah, we could certainly
That would be agreed between the chair and vice chair, and
Councillor Kingsley?
Can I just ask the clarification from Councillor Udall? What do you mean by commercial? Sure, what you mean by that?
A commercial operator letting this for a day for a commercial activity for profit rather than for community use. For example, a potential florist wanted to do it so she could prepare for Valentine's Day and have extra room in advance because it's a commercial activity. Or somebody who wants to have a commercial event and there for profit purposes rather than for community purposes. Because that will attract people from a wider area to come in and participate in this.
I think we need to look at the lease first. I think from what I know about the operator is that they need to make this viable. And actually, it's a balancing act, isn't it? Of keeping a building like this going and being profitable enough to operate. So I'm not sure about restricting them, because I imagine what they're trying to do is balance the community use, because that's their priority. And I know that the dance school uses it extensively, and that's part of the issue, I believe. One thing I'm concerned about is the fact that we haven't got any recourse within this application to get them to put solar panels on. And I do think with an application from the authority that we should be putting solar panels on every application that comes to this committee that is ours. So if people would be happy, I would really like to put that in the letter as well. Because we're thinking of a community who are looking at trying to balance the cost of operating this facility. We know energy prices are going up, and actually them having the benefit of solar panels would actually help them. And maybe then they could look at it in the future. I'm interested to know, because this is locally listed, what impact that actually has if in the future they wanted to put solar panels on.
Response, Chair. It has very, obviously, if the planning application came in, it would be a heritage consideration, but the locally listed state does not restrict the permitted development rights, and there is likely that permitted development rights would exist for putting solar panels upon this building.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions or anything? Any points people want to raise? No, Councillor Agar?
It's probably too small an application in a way to ask for a parking management plan, but if some kind of parking management or encouragement of people to use, you know, sustainable travel modes could be encouraged in the letter.
Yeah, I agree. I think picking up what Councillor Kinsley said about the barrel bikes, what Councillor Barnes said about the bus route, I think, you know, let's get them to put maybe some information up in the building or encourage the people who are hiring the building to come sustainably. I think that's great because we don't want cars everywhere causing chaos. Do I have anyone who's prepared to move to a motion as well? You're happy to, Councillor Udall. Fantastic. Do I have a seconder? Probably best not. Yeah, Councillor Barnes? Okay, lovely. Therefore, ready to vote? Yes? Yep. Is that a show of hands for... I haven't put my hand up yet. Wait a minute. Okay. This is in favour, everybody. Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Let's move on to agenda item 9. This is again Rebecca, and this is Victoria Avenue. Here. Get the presentation up.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, thanks. So agenda item 9 concerns the planning application at 125 Victoria Avenue, application reference 24/00648/HP. Planning permission is sought retrospectively for the erection of a single-storey outbuilding to contain a gym and shed in the rear of the property, rear garden, sorry. In terms of the site location, the property is situated on the northeastern side of Victoria Avenue, close to the junction with London Road, in a predominantly residential area. The site contains a 2-storey end-of-terrace property, which is in use as a single dwelling house. There is a garden to the rear of the property, which backs onto the gardens of properties on Wilds Lane. The site is not within a conservation area and does not contain any listed buildings. The site location plan is shown on the slide. And this plan also shows the location of the outbuilding to the rear of the garden. The application is retrospective on the basis that works have commenced, albeit they have not been completed, with works being paused during the consideration of this planning application. For the sake of clarity, there is no enforcement complaint associated with this building, with the planning application being submitted by the applicant because of the no need for planning permission due to the intended height of the proposal. Officer site visit photos of the partially constructed outbuilding are shown on the slide. This slide shows the proposed ground floor plan of the outbuilding. As shown on the plan, the outbuilding will contain a gym with a WC and shower room and a shed. This slide shows the proposed front and side elevations of the outbuilding. As shown on the front elevation drawing, the outbuilding would have 2 sets of bifolding doors and would be finished in wooden cladding. The key issues to consider in the determination of the application are the acceptability of the proposals having regard to the principle of development, design considerations, impact on neighbouring amenity, and biodiversity considerations. In terms of the principle of development, the garden of the host dwelling is of a size that can comfortably accommodate the proposed outbuilding. An adequate garden area of approximately 170 square metres would remain following the construction of the proposed outbuilding. The outbuilding is proposed to contain a gym and shed. The use of the outbuilding would be ancillary to the residential use of the host property, 125 Victoria Avenue, and could not be used as a separate self-contained dwelling. This is recommended to be secured by condition. The principle of development is therefore considered to be acceptable. With regard to design considerations, the proposed outbuilding is considered to be of a suitable size, design and appearance. The outbuilding would measure 9.6 metres in length to the front, 4.5 metres in depth and 3.1 metres in height. The scale, height and mass of the development is appropriate to the setting of the site. The extension would be finished in wooden cladding and would have bifolding doors to the front. The proposed materials are considered to be appropriate in the context of the site. It is noted that there are existing outbuildings at nearby residential properties, and the proposed outbuilding would be in keeping with the character of the surrounding area. Overall, the proposed outbuilding is considered to be acceptable in design terms. In the proposed location at the end of the garden, it is not considered that the outbuilding would have any unacceptable impact on neighbouring amenity. Although the outbuilding would be visible above the boundary fence to the side and rear, it is not considered to have any unacceptable impact on visual amenity to neighbouring properties. There are trees at the end of the gardens of properties on Wilds Lane to the rear of the building, which predominantly screen the outbuilding from view of these properties. It is not considered that the proposed outbuilding would result in any unacceptable loss of daylight, sunlight or outlook to neighbouring gardens. There would also be no unacceptable increase in overlooking or loss of privacy to neighbouring properties as a result of the outbuilding. The proposals are therefore considered to be acceptable having regard to impact on neighbouring living conditions. With regards to biodiversity, the Council's Landscape and Biodiversity Advisor was consulted on the proposals and recommended a green roof to the outbuilding, as well as a sparrow terrace box to increase diversity. These items have been agreed to by the applicant and are recommended to be secured by condition. No comments have been received from members of the public regarding the application. So officers have concluded that, subject to the recommended conditions, the proposals are acceptable with regard to the principle of development and design considerations and would not have any unacceptable impact on neighbouring amenity. Officers therefore have recommended that the application is granted subject to conditions. This concludes the officer presentation.
Thank you, Rebecca. If I can start, please, with just one question. Recommended condition number 1 says the development hereby permitted shall be begun before the expiration of 3 years from the date of permission. With a retrospective application, why do we have that in?
Through you, Chair. Well, here's the answer to your question. You're absolutely correct. That condition is not required because development has commenced. It's a standard condition which has been drawn through and it shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I was just thinking that we've got less than a page of conditions here, which will please Councillor Ramos. And actually, if I delete one, it's even shorter. How's that? Councillor Ramos.
Sharon, you're absolutely right. I noticed 1 page as opposed to 5.5 pages. I do have one concern, and it's a concern I've shared on many occasions with these sorts of applications. It's really summarised in paragraph 7.2, where it says the use of the outbuilding would be used only ancillary to the residential use of the host property and could not be used as a separate self-contained dwelling. Therein lies my concern. I know a family in Worcester who has, at the bottom of their long garden, a shed. I mean, it's genuinely a shed. There's some gym equipment in there, and the youngsters, or not so youngsters, just use it as a gym, doing, you know, ups and downs and whatever. And then they use the host property for if they want a shower or anything else. That's fine. But here, I notice there's a shower in the building. There's a toilet in the building. So could I ask if there's an electricity supply as well? Because my concern, Chair, which I think is plain for all to see, is that it will be used, or could well be used, as a dwelling. Because the reality is, I mean, I know there are not so many conditions, but in trying to enforce that this is not used as a dwelling is going to be very difficult, because basically who will know? Who will know, given the location of it? We don't have snoopers, so we will not know, and that is my concern. The condition, in practical terms, is unenforceable. But is there going to be an electricity supply as well, Chair?
Thank you, Councillor.
Through you, Chair, we haven't got that detail and we wouldn't expect that with a planning application. To give, hopefully, some comfort, planning permission would be required in any event for it to be used as a separate dwelling and unit of accommodation. The condition is there to provide that belt and braces approach to that. And who would know? Well, the neighbours will know, and our enforcement team is very capable of being able to identify whether this is a gym or a self-contained flat. In terms of its enforceability, it is absolutely enforceable, and it would be a breach of planning control. So it would be something that we would investigate wholeheartedly. I don't see that the condition is unenforceable, but in terms of the electricity supply, I can't give you that information because that's not a requirement as part of the planning application to find that out. Whether it is needed for other elements within that, electricity to sheds is not something that's unusual to be provided, but we haven't got that detail with us for the planning application.
Thank you, Chair. That's helpful. But could I just follow up on that point? Because it's the point I raised earlier about the information we have on which to make a decision. Now, it seems to me that whether or not there is an electricity supply is a material point, because it either confirms the likelihood or the less likelihood of it being able to be used for a dwelling. And we're saying here it must not be used as a dwelling. Obviously, if there's an electricity supply in there, then that makes it more likely that it could be. So why can we be told there's a water supply, obviously, but we can't be told whether there's an electricity supply?
Through you, Chair, I go back to my initial response in the fact that we don't need to know. In terms of planning applications, we don't see the electricity details because they are part of building regulations. So it's covered by another element. And whilst there may be some concerns by members in terms of it could be used for something else, you will have heard me say on previous occasions within this committee, we're not to speculate what it could be used for, because that use would require planning permission. So if there's a breach of planning considerations, the fact that if it had electricity supply or not, I would suggest is not a material consideration for you, because the use has been proposed as a gym. There is a condition that restricts it to be only used as ancillary accommodation. Planning permission would be required for a dwelling, and that is perfectly enforceable. So in terms of what you require, in terms of making consideration for an outbuilding, for a gym and a shed, you have adequate information before you to be able to make that decision.
Councillor Udall?
Just a simple question. I think I know the answer is we got no control, but I'll ask the question anyway. Experience of elsewhere of gyms such as this in back gardens have raised concerns about noise problems and light pollution. I don't see any comments, unless I've missed them, from regulatory services. Were there any comments received, and unless I've missed them? And is there anything which we can do with that, with those concerns, if they, to prevent a problem from occurring?
Through you, Chair, in terms of the outbuilding, we're not anticipating that it would be noisier over and above an ancillary building to a domestic property. If there are noise issues, regulatory services have the powers under the noise abatement, and probably greater powers than we have in terms of being able to prevent that. So I think it would be unreasonable to prevent noise and to frame a condition that said a specific noise level at a specific point would be very difficult, because I think it would be unreasonable to say that no music could be played within the building at all. So I would advise that it would be something that Worcester Regulatory Services would be better controlling as part of the noise abatement process.
There are no external lights shown on the drawings.
There are not, no.
Councillor Rudge, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just clarify a little bit about the green roof? Is my understanding correct that whatever that means exactly, I'm not entirely sure, but that's something that has to be planted and then maintained and sustainable? It's in order to increase the biodiversity, or at least maintain it, that has to be done on a regular basis.
Through you, Chair. Yes, a living roof is probably a better phrase, but a green roof is what is described within the planning jargon. It has to be maintained, and you'll see within condition 4 that details are requested to be provided in terms of the routine maintenance and the protection of the green roof. So officers have that concern as well, to make sure that we have the details of how it is going to be maintained going forward. But yes, it is something that is a living roof to provide biodiversity enhancement, and we will have details of all the species that are going to be provided, plus the maintenance regime.
Building on that, Councillor Reg, I'm wondering, you know, when you plant a tree, we have like a time period. If it dies, they have to replace it. Do we have a time period that the green roof, if it died, they'd have to replace it? I'm just thinking if there's like a big summer drought, they will die. What do? Do you give up on it, or do you start?
Very good question, and again, in terms of condition 4, in terms of the maintenance and protection, an additional minimum of 5 years would be an appropriate mechanism that would ensure that anything that died within that 5-year establishment process that was replaced, and that can be built into condition 4 if so felt appropriate.
Great, yeah, I'm happy with that. People happy with that? Councillor Agar?
At the risk of being flippant, the sparrows have a terrace, which is more than I have. And I think that the terrace sparrow box is very welcome. But otherwise, I think this is a reasonably acceptable application with the additions you've mentioned.
Councillor Barnes?
It's really disappointing that this is a retrospective application, and I say it every time, so I'm not going to change my view just because it's a fellow councillor. It's incredibly frustrating getting a retrospective application, even when it seems to be a completely legitimate application in itself, that I wouldn't have actually worried about at all. So maybe all councillors can just be reminded that they are meant to behave even more carefully than the general public when it comes to these matters, because it's embarrassing having this come here.
Yeah, I do believe in this situation there's been no need for enforcement because the height of the shed hasn't got up to the height where it would have been a problem. It is that it's going to be 3.1 metres that is the issue. The one thing that I've thought about actually is on other applications. We had one, I think, earlier in the year, or was it even last year, where we had somebody put an outbuilding in a garden, and there were all sorts of issues to do with the glass of the doors, and when you were speaking about lighting, it made me think about it, but it's also visual stuff. But here, I think we've got a really long garden. Is that correct? Do we know how far away this is from, like, neighbours, like, you know, bedrooms and overlooking it, I suppose?
Through you, Chair, we haven't got that detail to hand quickly enough, but it is your recollection of the slide is correct in terms that it is a long garden, and there would be no impact on neighbouring properties.
Do I have any other questions? Well, did you recommend it? You are happy to? Okay. Can I see anyone who's happy to second? Oh yes, well, actually, yeah. Is anyone happy to second it? I think we'll have Councillor Rudge. Yeah. So can we go through the changes to the conditions, please?
There's just the one. Sorry, there's two. There's the omission of condition 1, and then the addition to condition 4 in terms of the 5 year as a minimum maintenance period.
Yeah, I think that's right. Is that right? Everyone happy with that? Okay, so can we move to a vote? Okay, can I see all votes in favour, please? That's unanimous. Okay, thank you. I have got 2 AOBs, which we'll just quickly do. Here we go. Right. At our next meeting, before the meeting, we are going to have some training. It's going to be at 1:30. It is for biodiversity net gain. We all need to have this training because it's now really important with applications coming in with it as a consideration. But what that does mean, if we end up with a site visit, it will be earlier in the day. So if you can look at the date, please, and try and make your morning free. It could be that we have an application that means it's going to be a bigger day. But I'm sure we'll get some biscuits in or something. And then the second item is that we had officers send round an email asking for councillors' suggestions for projects for site visits. This is our annual review of interesting projects. We haven't had anybody suggest anything. So can we all please put our heads together and have a think about things that may be of interest that you'd like to see, and get back to us? That would be great. Yeah, Councillor Barnes?
It was mooted, the fire station, and I thought that was meant to be tomorrow, but obviously not.
Yeah, yeah, but that's separate to the planning visit.
In that case, I'd like to suggest that.
Councillor Sarah?
I'm a visitor on this panel, this committee these days. Is it possible for other members to come on the annual planning?
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, it is. We'd like everyone to come. The whole council. We'd like to educate everybody. All right. And on that basis, can I close the meeting? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.